And we're good, Kent.
Road number 29. We want to thank communications manager as for being on our show last week. It was great to learn about her two tops and her love of baseball and the Yankees and the passion she has for making connections with all walks of life within the hobby. Me and I would both agree that Tops is lucky to have her. It was a pleasure to host another Women of the Hobby guest on our show, which kind of segues into tonight's guest. Amit, you want to go take that over?
Tonight we have a super exciting guest. This is a guest that we had booked a very long time ago. She's the genius behind the @GiantLegend Instagram channel, which is the slogan "Tiny Treasures, Giant Legends," that is solely dedicated to showcasing her collection of pre-1972 vintage trading cards featuring women. Cindy has her master's in kinesiology. She's working at Arizona State University, and she's a super smart woman, and you can tell all that when you see her Instagram posts. I do want to give a special shout out for our good friend that Cindy knows and Kent and I know, Peter Pacman, who introduced us to Cindy, and I really want to make sure he gets a special shout out because he's all about diversity and inclusivity. And if without him, would have not met Cindy. So let's bring Cindy on.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
How are
thank
you?
you? I'm great, thank you. What a nice introduction.
No
Hope
worries.
I can live up to it.
We'll spice it out for you.
Okay.
I'll send you a snippet. So before we get into asking questions, I want you to kind of tell us about your experience, your brief experience at the National and meeting Peter Pacman live, and how you wish you had more time there.
Yeah, so this was the first National I had gone to. I kept seeing chatter about it on Instagram and what a huge show this was, and it truly was a huge show. I didn't have enough time to really see it in its fullness. I had about 4 hours, and if you ever go, it is the kind of show that you really need to have about 4 days at least. I think it's a 5-day show. It's a massive show. They take a large convention center, and I believe it rotates, and just it feels like hundreds of vendors and just so much of when it comes to supply. And so Peter came into my life when I all of a sudden got this shout out on Instagram of, I want to meet Cindy Dix. She's the go-to vintage women's sports cards. And it was like, who is this guy? And I'm just quietly doing my own thing on, Instagram, and, now and then putting up a card and some history and not really paying too much attention to it. And he blew up my page. And so all of a sudden I just got hundreds of followers through him. And so he just kept doing shouts out about the Giant Legends page, and I really wanted to meet him. So it was a great opportunity to meet him face to face, along with his brother and his friend. And it was probably the highlight of my show. And I, because I had such little time there, I didn't really get the time it deserves to really go through just volumes of cards, because a lot of times you might ask for vintage women's cards to a dealer, but they might know right offhand if they do know it, if they have it or not. But sometimes you really do have to look through what they have. So it was fun. Yeah.
I am on mute. Very professional of me. Which is nowadays with COVID, everyone has this problem where they're on mute, and everyone's kind of pointing at the camera. Hey, we can't hear you. So let me start again. So admittedly, when we were doing our research for the interview, for the questions, we really didn't know where to begin. You have a lot of data in terms of your Instagram posts. You have some web pieces. You've done some interviews and some, live on stage shows. And we watched your video from Ignite Phoenix, and you said something that stuck with us. You were mentioning your dream was to be an Olympian, and unfortunately you never got to realize that dream. But you said that was okay because records are meant to be broken and history is yet forever. After hearing that statement, I immediately was confident that we had the right playbook for our question for you tonight. So thank you for giving us a little bit of inspiration in that. However, just a little bit before we go there, let's just find out what Cindy was like as a young Cindy. So can you give us a snapshot of who Cindy was as she was growing up, loving sports, loving photos, touch on some of your favorite memories when you first fell in love with photos and newspaper clippings, and who were your favorite athletes growing up?
So I was fortunate to live in a town that everyone played soccer. All the kids played soccer in the 70s, and it was in the East Coast. And so I swam, I played soccer, I ran. I remember my first picking up like a book of women's sports, probably in elementary school. And I just loved the images. And I continued that through high school. And I remember cutting out newspaper clippings of images of Martina Navratilova, and in particular Zola Budd from the '84 Olympics, because I was a runner, and I just loved this idea that she was this barefoot runner. And unfortunately, her Olympic debut was a bit controversial, if you will, even though it wasn't really her fault, the tripping and all that. But yeah, I just remember that pictures were powerful to me early on, and of course, it tied into my love of athletics. And so, yeah, Martina was probably one of my favorite athletes, and not just because she was a tennis player, but she's Czech. I'm half Czech. And she's also just has a wonderful sense of sportsmanship and genuineness that resonated with me.
Awesome. And she does, and she was very well spoken. I remember when I was following her as well. I grew up a Boris Becker fan, and I watched in back in the days of Andre Agassiz with the crazy hair and shirts. But anyway, this is not the show to discuss that. We'll save that for another time.
The style, yep.
For sure. So you mentioned at the start of the show, you're working at Arizona State University. It has the name Sun Devils, which is appropriate for where the university is located. You mentioned that, you're working on a book about women's sports history. Can you want to elaborate more a little about that and tell us, will there be cards of women in that book, and where can people buy it, and what's the topic?
Yeah, so it's a look at women's sports history through the lens of their own trading cards, because it's such a unique medium to look at women's sports history. So there will be lots of cards in it, but there's also, and what's taking a lot of my time, is to look into the socioeconomic history of what the terms were like, or the times were like, when these women were competing in the countries they were, because it was dramatically different than it is today. And I think it's neat because it contextualizes it, but it also, you can see it in the cards. So, for example, the clothing fashions the restrictive clothing that they had to wear, the types of sports that they were allowed to play, if you will, or that were socially acceptable. And so you see the social standards mirrored in the visual images of the cards. The process I'm in right now is I have a proposal to a publisher. I'm waiting to hear back. If they don't accept it, I'll just keep, submitting it somewhere else, but I'll find the right home eventually, and I'll keep researching and writing in the meantime.
Almost went on mute again and started talking, caught myself there. There's a little bit of background noise. I just want to make sure the crowd doesn't hear that. So just before we go over to Kent, I'm going to say quickly to hi to people who joined. So Sumo Puppy, thanks for joining. Linda Ransdell, sorry, I said that right. Linda Ransdell, thanks for you for joining. A good friend, Dennis, good evening. Thank you for coming. And everyone's doing great tonight. Yes, we are. This is our good buddy, Name from Indigenous Rookie Cards. I don't know if you're familiar. He collects rookie cards of hockey players of Indigenous ancestry.
I've heard of him, yep.
He's quite well known on Instagram. A couple of Facebook users, which I can't figure out who this is.
It's Bobby.
It's Bobby? Okay, so
yeah,
Bobby.
And then he came in on YouTube after.
Bobby says hello to you, Cindy.
Hello. I've heard about you.
And yes, so Bobby here. He says happy Tuesday, everyone. Yes, Bobby is our hockey historian, and because you're a vintage, you're a vintage historian of women's trading cards, I thought there may be some nice synergies here. So I thought that I want to see if we could hear anything from that. You have a fan in Linda already. She says you're the GOAT of women's trading cards, and she can't wait for the book. Cool. So Kent, over to you, buddy.
Sure. So Cindy, as you work at a college school, were there ever any college trading cards made? And if so, do you have any vintage women's trading cards from that era?
Yeah, so college sports were interesting because it was more for the upper middle class that were able to play. It was expensive to go to college. And for a lot of the times, college was considered useless. Like, why would women need college? They need a husband. They need to make babies. And so, competitive sports in college were even more rare. But there are a few representations of women in college. This one's a golf representation. This is Baker University, and it's part of a college series. All of them are on the back. It came out from, sorry, you can't see it well, but 1911. It's a whole list of different schools. A lot of them are still in existence. This was from a company, an American company in New York that was a cigarette company. This one's part of a series. This is a much larger one. So whether you call it a trading card or not is up for debate. But this is a 4-part series of women in Ivy League schools, and this is one of them. And they say it's Princeton, but I've done some research that I'm skeptical that it's actually Princeton, because women weren't admitted to Princeton, for one thing, until much later, I think the 1970s. And this is from 1903, Tetlow Company, and this was like a face powder company. And so all of the schools were Ivy League, and I just think it was probably important for, both women and men to see representations of women playing sports. So there's others, but they're few and far between.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it's not like college today.
Now, you've mentioned that you had to have very specific criteria for your collecting, and that the card must be an original and created close to the time that these women were competing in. Your oldest card is from the 1800s, if I'm not mistaken, at a time where paper and printing processes were not as sophisticated as today. Can you give our audience and us an idea of how precious these cards are given the environmental conditions of the day?
Yeah, so colored printing was really rare. And the other thing it did was it brought the world to the viewer in ways that they didn't see otherwise. So you have to take a huge step back and imagine living in a day where there's no TV, there's no internet. Magazines are probably sparse, and newspapers were all type printed, which was black and white. They didn't even give a lot of space to ads. And if there were ads, it was black and white. And so the color printing was really special. And I don't know if you remember when you first got like a color monitor or a color TV.
Sure, yeah.
It's like, whoa, I'm in the 20th century or whatever. So that's what it must have felt like. Let me take this out of its sleeve. This is probably the oldest card I have. It's from 1854, so said the seller.
1854, wow.
Yeah, and it's of a young girl playing badminton. And so each one of the colors had to be printed in its own layer. And this was probably a lithograph, which meant you put ink or wax on a stone and you drew it out, and then you put the paper over it on that color, and then you did another one at a different color and another. And so, it was a long process to make prints. And so that's why they were really special. And these started as trade cards, which usually would be either a giveaway by the merchant or actually had something about the merchant's business on the back.
Oh, okay.
And so, this practice goes back to about the 1700s, not so much with cards, but it was almost like a business card where somebody would have a picture of their shingle and the shop. And so people, because this was back in London and, the streets weren't marked, people had high illiteracy rates. So pictures associated with business started almost as what trade cards became. So, yeah, so getting a color picture was like magic, and people held on to them because they knew they were special. It wasn't something that you just, you could just put on a Xerox machine and print out 100 copies with no problem. Yeah, so trade cards eventually became trading cards, and cigarette cards in particular. That's a whole different history, but we can go there if you want to.
So during that time period, is there any references to roughly how many they would have made?
There's some research out there for specific areas. Like I've only looked at in relation to women's cards. So yeah, there have been resources out there. There's of course collectible books. They usually look at different cards, and you'd have to compile them together. So I don't know what the total number is of what has been produced. I think some are definitely more rare than others.
I was going to say, I would imagine back in the day, especially since the subject matter is women, that they would have made a lot.
Probably more so in like the models or cards that showed women as mothers. I don't know how much on the sports side though.
Right. Okay.
And in this day, in this early, like mid to early 1800s, the trade card days, these were mostly represented as like recreational sport. These probably weren't competitive opportunities. Who knows if these were actually real people? And so I don't really specialize in trade cards, but I have a few, and especially for the book, just so it's this important visual stepping stone that where people saw women playing sport.
That's really interesting because you bring up a couple of good veneers in history there, right? Showing angles of society that wasn't normally shown. So that's definitely Linda did say something here. Maybe it's related to one of the pictures you showed. So I believe she was saying it's Smith College is one of the ones on the back of that card. I wasn't sure if that's what the reference was.
I don't think so. I don't know what the tennis card is blank, or the badminton card. This one is a German card. So
we'll
it could be.
Linda,
One of the college cards, maybe.
Maybe the one with the P.
Yeah, who knows if it's Smith? That would be interesting. Smith did have a robust, women's sports history, but I don't think they're in specifically in one of the Ivy League cards. I know Harvard is, Yale is. That's supposed to be Princeton, and then there's a fourth one. I don't recall.
So Bobby's asked a question. He was wondering, for Princeton, would the women playing sports replace many that went to war? So that's an interesting question.
Which war?
Probably, what year did you say? Which year?
That was 1903. So that was kind of, in between the Civil War, World War I.
Yes,
but no, they didn't have women. And even I looked up if there was a sister school, and there was, but it closed before that card was made. So, so I'm just not convinced it's Princeton.
When you hold that card, the larger one, is it a thick card, or does it feel brittle, or does it feel solid? Like, what does it feel like?
This one's kind of like it's not thick like a cigarette card, like the early cigarette cards were. It's almost more like a postcard.
Okay. By the way, Bobby was saying the Boer War. That's the war he was referring to.
Oh, well, you've got me beat there. I'm sorry. I don't know what that is.
We'll have to research that, Bobby, either on Cindy's side or your side, or both, because I can say this is probably the first time we've had a trading card show with the mention of the Boer War. So I'm sure we're a one of one there.
You've out-historyed me.
For sure. Bobby knows his history.
Yeah.
Kent, you were sorry.
Over to you.
So you're a curator of these historical pictures, and you talk about the rarity of trading cards. What aspect of history, of the historical significance, attracts you?
I think the fact that women were picked, athletic women were picked they were chosen to be represented on something that was a giveaway, but it also represented their company. Mm-hmm. And you just really have to understand the animosity that was towards women athletics, female athletes, I should say. There were some acceptable sports like tennis and horseback riding and ice skating, swimming, kind of the more graceful sports. And then there was a handful of sports that were off limits. And we're talking again, up until about the first half of the 20th century. And the farther back you go, the stronger that those feelings of women don't play sports. They shouldn't play sports. It will hurt the womb. It'll make you unattractive to men. You'll never be a mother, et cetera, et cetera. And so just a lot of fallacies out there that were never scientifically backed. And so to pick women on, again, something that marketed a product is really interesting. And the fact that there's a lot of them on cigarette cards. And so cigarette cards, at least in the US, were seen as a vulgar, habit for women. Like it was akin to prostitution if you smoked as a woman in the US until about the 1920s. So to have women, athletes, again, was just an interesting combination. Because they obviously weren't marketing to women. I think they were marketing to the collector mentality, but men were the buyers. So yeah, it's that whole notion that women were selected at all as athletes, and there's a lot of them.
The last time we chatted, and I remember there was an interesting part of a conversation which didn't make it into the questions, but it was around the fact that I think it was you that mentioned that smoking around women was popular overseas, and then the cigarette companies got wise to it and realized, okay, we need to exploit that demographic, and that's kind of how that proliferation happened. Did we talk about? I can't remember.
Yeah, right? It was more acceptable in Great Britain than it was in the U.S. And so the wealthy women from England would go on the ship and come over here and just light up and not think anything of it. And everyone else was like, "Oh my gosh, they're smoking," and that kind of helped bring it over here. But then also the wealthy women that would go to the U.K. would see women just smoking without, thinking twice about it. And so they're like, why not us? And the elixir was that, this was in the time of the suffragette movement and the
Mhm.
fight for equality, the fight to vote in both of those areas, the US and the UK. And so it got tied to, if men can smoke, so can women. And it was this whole marketing campaign about, the women's right to smoke as well as men. And so, yeah, it just kind of, it took off that way because it was seen as something towards equality.
For sure.
Yeah, you can both have this bad habit.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll eventually kill you, but don't
Right,
worry,
right.
we're on
Equally
equality.
dead. Yeah.
So Bobby mentioned one thing here early, just a couple of questions. So he said bookmarkers were an early inception to trading card history. That's interesting to know.
Mhm.
And we have a friend of ours for the show, Peeps. He says, hi, pals. He said, giant legend. Awesome. So he's heard of you. So that's awesome to hear.
Thank you.
So you touched on something really neat. Sorry, not neat. Something interesting in your earlier conversation, which is around equality. So our show is about diversity and inclusivity. So we want to educate as well as inform. So beyond just the environmental conditions, there was like deep-rooted themes of inequality in society at the time. To be even more specific, here are some examples, and I'm only listing a few. You obviously will have more examples than I. Women were not featured as often as men on cards. That's one. You mentioned this, women were required to dress appropriate to their circumstances. And finally, black women were not promoted as often as white women. So those are kind of three facets that we picked up last time. And I feel some of these reasons are the reasons why these cards feel extra special in your hands. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I'll just address the exclusion of women of color, and it's on the cards, but it was also in sport. And I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective.
Sure.
It's just so unfortunate that the women that were the non-white women, if you will, that were allowed to compete were never picked up on cards until probably like the 1950s. I think Althea Gibson might be my first one. And then some in track and field in 60s and onward, it gets a bit more common. But just systematic racism that excluded women of color out of sport. And then, of course, they weren't picked in societal, to market their product. And we'll talk a little bit about one of them in just a little bit. But it's what you don't see because they're excluded doesn't mean they weren't there. And so I do make a point to pull out the ones that were there, even though they're not on the trading cards.
It's interesting because I just thought of this now, but so you have this whole sector of trading cards, which are predominantly men. So already you have men and on card, and they're in cigarette packs, and they get ripped up and beat up, right? So that's rare in itself, right? Then a subset of that is women on trading cards. Then a smaller subset is black women on trading cards. So think about it. Your focus on your collection is quite rare.
Yeah.
So it's actually very rare because it was not as proliferate as the male part of the side.
Yeah, I'd say the women of color make up at best. I don't even know if 1% is an accurate number. Could be less than 1% as the number grows in my database, but probably not more than 1%. And I can even show them all on a slide when I give talks. I'm like, this is it. This is all I have. This is all I've ever seen in almost 30 years of collecting.
Oh wow, that's
yeah.
true. Yeah,
it's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate, but you're doing something which I found is amazing. You're documenting this on Instagram and all your other channels, and the fact that it's going to remain ever present, evergreen. This content will live on forever in a digital medium, so people will always be there to learn and listen. Right?
Great.
So Bobby was still listening to us, so thank you for that. And he mentioned something which is going to come up later. He talks about 1924 Dominion Chocolate, Canadian who has many famous female sports cards. Hold that thought, Bobby, because I'm kind of glad you brought that up. So let's go back to my questions here. So here's another cool thing about your trading card. So there's not only is the historical significance we just discussed, right? There's the advertising and marketing significance. There's the sexism, and then there's racism. But there's something kind of cool about something that happened in about 1972. This is significant because in 1972, Congress signed into U.S. law U.S. passage of Title IX, which ended sexual discrimination of any educational program or activity receiving federal financial aid. Can you speak of how monumentally important that part of U.S. history is and how that applies to your collecting?
Yeah, so the 72 passage of Title IX is kind of my line in the sand of this is where I focus my resources on everything that was printed before 72 because of Title IX. And it was just a way for me to kind of control this collection, if you will. I found more contemporary cards, easier to find, and which wasn't a challenge. And there's a lot. And so I think I was just out of school when I was starting, and they're expensive. And so it was like too many. And I didn't find them as interesting as I found the older cards. So Title IX, what it did in the US was it opened the opportunities for girls and women to play sports where those doors were shut before. It legally forced schools to have this formula to create balance. And it's gone through different iterations from, when the NCAA took over college sports to when people could actually sue for monetary damage. And that really put teeth into the law and forced schools to wake up and make changes is when they could get sued. Whereas before it was just the Office of Civil Rights saying, you're being bad and you need to be equitable and we're going to take away federal funding if you don't. And they never took away federal funding. So it was that whole, you could sue now to make a difference. And that has brought in this, massive feeding ground of athletes that created this like pipeline, if you will, into the Olympics and into the pros. And, girls like to play sports. We've always known this as girls, but we just didn't always have the opportunity. So with that, within the US and especially on the international stage, no country wants to be left behind. And it really is showcased at the Olympic level. And so I think it's had, it's trickled down is probably the wrong way to look at it, but it's had an effect, a positive effect on other countries that have also put efforts into making their, girls and women's sports opportunities better. I can't say that any other, countries have laws like Title IX just because I don't study that, but it seems to have raised up the quality in some countries. So it's made a huge difference. Yeah.
So it's kind of cool you mentioned Olympics because we just had the end of the Olympics in Japan. And I want to first give a big shout out to Team Canada Soccer for finally bringing home the gold. But we're all friends, so we're not going to get into politics. But you do have some. Can you give us a brief history? Sorry, can you give us some thinking behind the women's only Olympics and share some of your earlier trading cards of Olympic themes that have female athletes on it?
Yeah, so one of the really neat things that the cards opened up my world to was that there was a women's only Olympics. And I learned about it when I took about 200 of my cards, my German cards, to my German relative. And he, God bless him, translated them. And he was also an academic. And so he kept seeing this Olympia de Grassen. And it's like, what is this? And so I said, I don't know. But so these are the two of the three cards that talk about the Olympics of Grace.
Oh, wow.
So, oops. Sorry for all the reflection. But they both specifically mention on the back Olympia de Grassen. And this was a women's only Olympics that happened in 1931 in Italy. And you have to remember, this is fascist Italy. So this was actually, approved by Mussolini. And it was only allowed because strong women made strong babies. And again, this was the women's number one role in life was they would show patriotism by bringing on new Italians. And so I think that was about 150 women came to those games and competed. And I don't think the Italians won anything. But it was sort of this push and pull between the fascist government wanted to have stronger women, and yet there was this push against athleticism, largely due to the Catholic Church and in Italy of saying, no, women shouldn't be in sports. And so, there's a little bit about the Olympics of Grace. And then the women's only Olympics, was hosted 4 times, and it was quite a bit different. It was a much larger venture, and it started because women were, same with the Olympics of Grace, but women were really frustrated with the low number of sports they could compete in the Olympic Games. And I have a card here somewhere of one of them. I just found it too, which was really exciting, this one. So there's several from this. This is a German series from about 19 34. So this is Gisela Meyermauer, I think, and she's a shot putter, and it specifically references the London Games.
Huh.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so to actually see a trading card from the Women's Olympics was really cool. It wasn't called that after, I think, their first or second games, because the Olympic Committee said, you cannot use the Olympics in your name. And the founder of it said, I will take it out when you add more sports for women. And so that's, the Olympic Games eventually did add more sports begrudgingly. It wasn't as many as the Women's Olympics wanted, but they did. And so some other cards from early Olympic events, I'm not going to take this one out because it's a bit more fragile. This is another German card. And by the way, Germany probably put out more trading cards of women's in sports than any other country. But these are the 3 medal winners from the 1912 swimming event. I think it's 2 Australians. And if you notice, 2 are crossing their arms.
Yes.
These bathing suits were incredibly sheer. These were like stockings.
Oh,
And
God.
so the one in the middle, I think, is the one that won, and she's looking rather proud. But the other ones are crossing their chests. So that was printed in 1926 of the 1912 games. And then just one other card. I mean, there's a lot of Olympic sports, but another one that's my favorite is the women's 4x100 winning team from 1936 games. And they won, but they weren't supposed to win because the Germans were leading until they dropped the baton. But I just love how proud that they looked. Sorry about the reflection. And this would have been what's called a redemption card. This was, you would send in your Deutschmarks and they would send back this packet of larger cards, and then you would paste them into a book.
Redemption card. Wow.
Wow, redemption cards way back then. And,
yeah. They were smart. They knew how to market.
So our good friend Bobby actually wants to share some other paraphernalia he has featuring women on it. I'm just going to do a quick screen.
Yeah, go for it.
Give it a few seconds, and I will share. So he has a looks like a pure rye alcohol bottle, but if I'll zoom in, you can actually see there's a woman playing golf.
Oh, wow.
On it.
No, I think it's hockey.
It's hockey. Oh, it's hockey. You're right. It looks like a golf club.
It is. Yeah, she's got skates on.
The dead giveaway, which I missed completely, is the word hockey and wearing skates. So there you go. That's why I do this for fun. So there's an example of one. He's actually shared a couple of others, which I'm just going to stop sharing screen share for 1 second and get the other one. Give me 1 sec here.
Bobby is saying it's 1902.
Wow. Those hockey players drinking back then.
Gosh.
Yeah. I can't believe I said golf. That was embarrassing. And then we have one here. Miss Ada McKenzie, Toronto. So Canadian International Golfers has won many Canadian championships. And this is by Wright and Ditts and Bats. Pretty interesting.
I've never seen that card, but I know her name. I think probably from the Dominion Chocolate series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen the other. Yeah, I've seen that one. Well, see, this is one of these situations where they changed the backs. Photographs were kind of rare back then, and so companies sometimes would take the same image. I don't know if they do the same in the men's card world, but they would take the same image and change the back, and I'll show some examples too of that. So yeah, that's a beautiful card.
Interesting. So this is exactly why I was hoping Bobby would come, because I thought this would be a cool segue between two people who enjoy history, enjoy trading cards, and have a wealth of knowledge. Bobby definitely has a wealth of knowledge, so I'm glad that he's here.
Yeah, we'll have to talk offline.
For sure. There is a couple comments from Bobby here, and I think Kent, you just said this. 1920 Champ cigarettes. These are the cards that are from the very rare. Mm-hmm. And Name is saying, this is really awesome, Cindy. I'm wondering if you ever come across any indigenous female athletes from North America featuring any vintage sports cards.
You know, I've got one of, and I think they're playing, you would think it could be lacrosse, but it's Native American women. And it looks like it's early part of the 1900s, but it could also be like, in my recollection, it's almost like a field hockey scene, which would be odd, but not a lot, you know. And it's most of these cards came out of Germany, the UK, and the US. Some Canada. I think there's 23 countries overall, but yeah, there's some, let's see, I have a few Spaniards and a few Japanese women. But they're hard to find. It's hard to find.
There's like, you're talking about increasingly small slivers of segments, right? So it's rare, right?
Yeah.
That's an excellent question and name, and hopefully we'll learn more over time. Name has done a wonderful job of educating us on Indigenous history and his contributions to the sport of hockey. And he has an awesome Instagram handle. So check him out at Indigenous Rookie Cards. You won't be disappointed. And for everyone else, check out at Giant Legends. She's right here. So I've been talking a lot, and I took one of Kent's questions. I'm going to steal back my time, and I'll let Kent talk. So Kent, this is a cool topic coming up. Go ahead.
Actually, I was gonna just show this one comment from Linda. That's for you, Meat.
Yes. Thanks, Linda. I feel even more smaller than I completely missed the word hockey, and is Canadian, and she's holding a hockey stick and wearing skates.
She's a huge hockey fan.
I'm going to chalk it up to stress of doing a live show. Okay. Thanks, Linda.
So speaking of the Olympics, which just occurred, can you tell us who Alice Coachman is and the significance and the importance of the role she played in Olympic history? And does she have a trading card?
I'll get to that. So Alice Coachman was the first Black woman that earned a gold medal, and it happened in 1948, and she was a high jumper, an American high jumper. And I have never seen a card of her around the time she competed. So usually that's like within a 10-year span. I mean, the closer the better. I would love it if if one exists. And I have been surprised before when I've said, I've never seen a card, and then, poof, something shows up. The first ones I've seen of her come 48 years later, and they were both produced in 1996. And so I don't do aftermarket cards because they reflect the times today and not the times back then. And they couldn't impact the women back then or the girls back then. So that's why, it was an important piece in history, and I'm glad they finally made a trading card of her, but it wouldn't make the collection, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, as far as the book goes, yeah. But she's the one that I would talk about, but there's no card to show that yet.
So speaking of Olympics and vintage cards, you've kind of showed us the sampling of different eras of Olympic trading cards so far. Is there any particular ones that you're looking to try to add that are kind of obscure out there that you don't have?
Yeah, so I've got like a short list at this point of cards that I really love to find. I think it was made by Bond Bread, and it's a Babe Zaharias, although it might be under Mildred Zaharias, and she's a golfer, and it's from the 50s. And I'm not 100% sure it's Bond Bread. I've never seen it for sale. I just have an image of it. There is a reversed card of, it's a series from Cadet Suites of Althea Gibson, from the Slow series, I think, Slough. And then there's some older ones from the 1900s, the Cope series, the New Woman card, where it's this woman in trousers. It's an illustration, and she's playing golf. And that's an important point in the book when we transfer from like the Victorian era to a little bit more of a modern era. And it was called The New Woman. And it was really neat to see it again and again in research, but also that it was reflected in this card. And then there's another golfer who was an actual person from that same series named Margaret Scott.
Wow.
So those are just four of the ones that I've been hunting for, and I've seen some of them. And the Margaret Scott card is like on eBay right now for $425 or something. So I just wait, until it's a bit more affordable, because I buy a lot of cards. So yeah,
it's a problem that we all have.
Yeah. There's
Self-control.
There's a group for us somewhere.
So speaking of cards, Cindy, how many cards would you say you have right now in your personal collection today?
In this genre, meeting that criteria, it's almost 1,400, and I've got a database of, I think it's about 2,200. And so the neat thing about having a timeline cutoff is that there has to be a total max amount, and so part of the book I would love to do is have a resource of like a database of saying this is what's out there that we know of, and then eventually I'd like to make that a digital version so it's more accessible. But yeah, it's been, I've collected off and on. I don't look at eBay every day. I've gone months without doing anything. And, but it's been a continuum in my life. And I've probably been working on the book for the past few years.
That's great.
It's a labor of love.
Just before we get into more questions, just want to bring up a couple of comments. Plus, Bobby is sharing tons of information.
Oh, good.
Pictures, so we're going to bring that up because I wouldn't. It's as interesting, so I'll share it in a second.
Bobby's my brother from another mother. I can feel it.
There you go. The guy, we interviewed him. I can't remember what it was earlier, and it was just so much fun. We're going to have him on again because there's just so many.
He's literally a wealth of knowledge for sure.
And same with you, Cindy. Like as we get to know you more and more, we'll say other avenues. So Dennis said something that actually is music to my ears. Mm-hmm. This is really opening my eyes to cards I didn't know existed. This is exactly what Kent and I and Cindy as well are trying to achieve. Is to show the world that there's more than pop culture. I'll call it pop culture cards right now. There are other cards that are out there. So let me organize my thoughts here. I'm going to get these cards shown. And share my screen again. So he's shown a couple of different variants of the same card. Let me double check what he said.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the variants, yes.
Compared to Dominion chocolate cards, these are the other ones. So there's the variants, right?
Yeah, I think I have most of those, except for some of the variants. I have the one on the bottom. I know that because the creepy face. It's probably a sports mask, but it's creepy.
There's that, and then he showed this one, and your dog agrees. Through Gladys Robinson, from Right and Distant Catcher's Mass, and then he's got a couple of ones here. Champs cigarettes. That's where some of those ones have come from. And then here's the Dominion chocolate advertisement. So the cycles hopefully come soon. Just showing, I don't know if you can see here. I'll just zoom in. You'll see like different imagery here that's used for Dominion chocolates, and kind of like the advertising they were using. And it's also a Canadian company. So here you go. So there you go. There's some cool tidbits of history shared by Bobby.
Cool. And I'll show you one, not that we rehearsed this or even ever met Bobby, but one of my favorite cards, again, sorry for the reflection, I just blanked on her name. Gosh, Fanny Bobby Rosenfeld. She was kind of like the Babe Didrikson of Canada. She was this amazing all-around athlete, and it's graded, so it's protected, but it also makes it really hard to ever photograph. And this is the only one I've seen of her as she's holding a basketball, but it's the only one I've ever seen of her by herself. Otherwise, she's running in the Olympics.
1925, wow.
Yeah, this one took a while to get, but so glad I did.
Oh, Cindy, can you mention, is that the one where it has the retained bottom? Is that the one we were talking about before?
I don't have an example of the little coupon on the bottom, no.
Yeah, but you want to explain to people what the coupon was for, that those don't know?
Yeah, so the chocolate company was smart. Instead of having to send back the whole card to get a redemption, you could just tear off this tab and send that in and get back whatever it was. Bobby probably knows what you got back, but more chocolate, I don't know. But so some of the cards with the tab have a higher value than ones that don't. To me, the tab is inconsequential. It's really about, the picture, about who she is. So.
Yeah, and Bobby agrees. She was an all-around athlete for sure, and he's saying yes, that has the coupon. So, actually, you were showing the graded card is great synergy because we're going to get into that next. So, how many of your cards besides that one do you have graded, and what are your thoughts on graded cards?
I've never really counted them. I'd probably say off the top of my head, probably maybe only 30 or so are graded. A lot of people don't get women's card graded because it costs to get something graded. And so if you don't think the card is worth anything to start with, which a lot of people don't, I can't tell you how many people have given me women's cards, especially when I first started collecting, not the vintage ones per se, but the ones from the 90s. Like, here you go. I don't want them. So if you're not going to, you're not going to pay $20 on something to have it graded just to sell it. So I love them when they're graded. Somebody else has paid for them, even though I might be paying for it some way or another, but it's kind of a stamp of authenticity, which is really important to me, that they are original. I'm just going by faith that people aren't selling me reproductions. but it also gives sort of a quality. And I've always tried to buy the best quality cards that I can afford. And it's only like a case that if I come across a card that I've never seen before, and it might be crappy condition, I'll still get it just because I've never seen it before. So yeah, this is another graded card from Mola Mallory, one of the great tennis players of the early 20s. And this is, the Cope series.
Sorry, 1944. Okay.
Yeah, 1924. Yeah.
24.
Hold up that card, just so everyone gets a sense of. Look at the clothes she's wearing. So imagine trying to be the greatest at tennis in wearing outfits like that, where I'm sure the men probably didn't have to deal with that.
Yeah, they wore slacks a lot of times. Women had to wear skirts, and they varied in length depending on the style at the time. But boy, particularly the early 1900s, they were wearing skirts down to their ankles. So I don't know how they moved.
So it definitely takes talent to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned earlier, and I don't remember if you said it or not. It was the card you have from the 1800s. That's your oldest one?
This is the one from 1854 is the oldest one, but that wasn't really, that I know of, a competitive athlete. Hattie Stewart was a competitive athlete. She was a boxer.
Yeah.
And if you can see her, and you can see on the bottom, there's one where she's sparring with a guy.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So this is from like 1888. It's from the W.S. Kimball Company. It's a tobacco company out of, I think, Virginia, I believe. And then, of course, like many cards, they either talk about the company itself, or they might have like list the series of the card, the cards that are in the series. So Hattie was a boxer, and she self-proclaimed herself the best boxer in the U.S. And then this other Hattie said, no, I am. And so they were going to have a fight to decide who was the best. And then the other Hattie died before they could ever have a fight.
Oh, no.
But I just found this was a fascinating card, because I would have never thought that there'd be female boxers back in the 1800s. And there's actually a long history of women boxing. And, it was either they were actually fighting, or maybe they were performing in the vaudeville type circuit. But women had such few ways to make money. And this was one avenue. And the other thing I found that was interesting was that women would box. The cool thing about this card is you can see she's bare-fisted here.
Right.
And then the little one, if you can see it, she's wearing little white gloves. And so this marked this transition between this bare-fisted period to the gloved period, and more of the rules we know today. The other thing I didn't know is that sometimes women would box bare-breasted, just like the men, and in addition to being bare-fisted. So it was a show, I suppose. But no, I would have never guessed that women would be on a trading card with boxing. And I personally, I don't like boxing, but this is one of my favorite cards.
Yeah,
I can't even imagine. Yeah, I was gonna say, I can't imagine boxing bare-fisted back in the day.
Oh, it would just be brutal. Yeah, not fun.
No, I wouldn't want to do that. And also, if you think about it, the rise of women's wrestling, women's UFC, like there are some fairly tough challengers out there. So I'm not surprised that there were tough cookies back then too.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a little bit earlier. I want to make sure we actually came across this question as well. So you mentioned something about, like, for example, the coupons underneath cards and their variations. Have you come across regional variations of the same cards that you've had, or you've come across through your research? And the reason I bring this up is often in older baseball pictures, the picture on the card, maybe from a different baseball cap or a different design, or different back design. Did you notice something like that when you were going through your research?
Yeah, I've noticed, again, so a lot of times companies would use the same image. And so that's a kind of a common thing. So this is a fencer, Helen Meyer. So same image. She's a German-American fencer, but the back is different.
Yeah.
And this is really bad on the reflection side. I should have sent you these ahead of time to share. So that's somewhat common. Here's another one where this is Ethel Catherwood from Canada, and she was an Olympic high jumper. So that's the image. And then this company, which you can see it's much bigger of a card, and it's upside down, colored it. So it's the same image.
Wow.
This is a shoe polish card, the colored one.
Huh.
So you would get it if you bought shoe polish, as opposed to that one. So yeah, that one's, and I love this. I just think this is just so beautiful what they did with it. And then the third example I'll share, if you can see it, this one's a really weird one. These are called strip cards, and they're American. So they were all, you'd hand cut them. So Helen Wills, one of the best tennis players in the 1920s, 30s, probably even into the 40s. So these are strip cards of Helen, but one says ex-champ and one says champ.
Huh.
It's on the bottom. And again, I'm trying to like get it out of the reflection. So yeah, I was like, who makes a card of somebody that says ex-champ? And Bobby, if you know this answer, I would love to hear it, because I haven't found anybody that knows. Like, is this a fake card? Is this, was this one of these like one-offs? Let's put this out there as an ex-champ and see who collects it. I don't know, but I've never seen it before. So yeah, there are interesting variations.
Now, Cindy, the two high jumping ones, how many years apart were those?
I think they're both from like the 30s, early 30s. The little one, the black and white, is Bulgaria Sport, which I think is like 1932. And I'd have to look up for sure when this one was, this other German card.
Oh, interesting. So one's German, the other one's from another country.
I think they're both German.
Okay.
I believe. Yeah. Yep. No, they're both German. Mons. Yeah.
Huh.
Germany, like I said, they loved athletics.
Wow.
And they would put cards out of everybody, but particularly Germans.
So Germany and Canada, I think, are in the lead for the vintage population for putting out cards. I noticed that as we were talking. Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
So Bobby, obviously, who is our resident hockey historian, he has shared with us some interesting facts and cards that were made primarily as confectionery releases. Your cards also have tie-ins to confectionery releases. Can you share with us a few examples? And there is one with a Canadian tie-in, which I think was your first vintage card, I believe.
Yeah, so this one was this is the card that literally rocked my world and sent bubbles of excitement through my blood. And I'm going to take it out because, so this is an O-Pee-Chee card, which is a Canadian candy company.
O-Pee-Chee, wow.
Wow, we never heard of that before.
Yeah, so I just saw it in, it was probably like an antique show in Virginia. It was underneath a display case, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's an athlete. That is so cool. Bubbles of excitement. Didn't know what I was onto, but I knew I was onto something special. So that's one. Of course, the Dominion Chocolate series. There's quite a few: candy, gum, coffee, margarine, shoe polish. I even have one from the late 1800s that if you bought a piano, you got a card, and there's this woman playing tennis. Yeah, what we know of baseball cards today have a huge association with bubblegum, and the Topps company in particular, because they had an exclusive. Right. And I grew up with those, and I had some of those too. I still remember the smell of the gum. But yeah, so it went from tobacco, into candy.
So like they first were trying to market it to men, then they went to women, and like now let's go to kids.
Yeah.
And again, not exactly healthy stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
By the way, Bobby had so your high jumping one. They had the small one and the one with color. His response to that was with strip card. Sorry, the ex-champ one. With strip card, they would issue them for a few years so they could have updated the stone, which is why there could have been a different variation.
Mm. Yeah, I'd have to look, because it's really hard to find information on strip cards, I find, especially of women in sports. Like, what year did they produce it? Because, was it ex-champ, like she's done, she's retired, or was it she lost a big match and when she's a washout? I don't know. I'd love to like pick the brain of the people that actually made, the cards and selected who was going to be on it.
Well, it's interesting because, like, just getting a little nerdy here for a second. Like, I work in advertising, and I like print, like this guy, and I'm in art as well. The thought process that goes into creating such things, especially at a time where printing wasn't, we don't have printers on our computer and tables like we do here. It was a laborious process. Paper was in short supply. There was wartime issues. So this stuff took time to create. So this is not stuff that just did willy-nilly. They actually took it's an art form, right?
Right.
And some of your ones that you're shown, the color is amazing still. So think about how long it's lasted.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Yeah, and I make sure they don't see the light of day usually, just because the light is damaging.
True. Sorry, go ahead, Kent.
You said in the past that when you see a rare card on eBay you haven't seen before, you get really amped and up to obtain the card to the point where you've abandoned hikes, dinner parties, etc. to win these auctions. So we have to ask, Cindy, are you still winning?
Yes. Oh yeah. I
Good.
mean, I have my limit, my financial limit, but it's probably the funnest thing I do. Actually, it is. I'll type something like, "There's an auction ended in 2 minutes," and some of my friends like, "I just love watching you bid at the end because it's just so much fun," and they get into it too. But literally, my heart rate starts going up, and it's just fun. I mean, sometimes it's fun to secure it. If it's like a buy it now, it's like good, it's done with. But
Right.
yeah, auctions are they're competitive. So when you combine a former athlete with, buying sports cards, you get this mixture of like competitiveness and a collector.
Now, have you encountered points where you were outbid at the last second?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Those are painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, my partner hears about it for weeks on end. Like, I have to let it go. I just have to let it go. I should have bid higher, blah, blah, blah. It's like I need a counselor for this.
Have you ever lost a card to a person you know?
Not that I know of, and it was funny because I was in a bidding contest that I actually won, but all of the other bidders were private, private bidder. And then I could see my name, which I don't think they could see my whole name, but it's kind of a silly name. So it just doesn't sound like it's a serious bidder. And then I beat them all. So
It's the underdog. It's the underdog bidder.
Yeah, but I was the only one that was named. I'm like, chickens, come on.
So Bobby has shown me another photo, which
nice.
Yeah, I'm going to share with you. Bobby, if you're still there, if you want to text us on live or in the banner, just tell us a little bit more about this card. But this one's pretty rare. So this is the OPG from London, Ontario, Bubblegum Record Breakers Picture Gum.
That's the wrapper.
Fastest things on earth. This is the wrapper.
Wow.
Yeah, I've seen a few wrappers come up for auction. I usually don't go from again. It's just like I have to have a focus, and usually it's for the cards. But those are really interesting to see like where they came from.
And look at the color in this.
Yeah, it's beautiful condition. It looks like a 4-color print, and
yeah,
beautiful
really
condition.
Neat. So, like I said, Bobby's got probably, I'm sure he's got a plethora of things that we haven't even touched on. So one thing too, you're talking about like you see a rare card and you mentioned how happy you are, and you talk about sometimes your partner looking off to the distance and you're actually sneaking a look at your phone. We've all been down that road. My kids now are Bobby says this is the wrapper for your favorite card.
Oh.
So there you go. So we got a tie-in.
I don't think we've even talked about my favorite card yet though. But
it was the boxer.
Oh, the Hattie Stewart. Really?
Yeah.
That was a tobacco card though. Oh well, I guess yeah.
Unless Bobby, which card was it? Because I know we mentioned a couple of favorite ones.
Yeah, you would think that would come out of a tobacco pack.
Yeah, let me just confirm, Bobby, and we'll know.
Okay.
So we're gonna switch it up a bit here because the one you just showed, the one you just showed.
The last one you just showed, I guess.
The O-Pee-Chee?
Was the O-Pee-Chee one, Bobby? Just type yes or no.
Well,
give him a second. Oh, we'll come back.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's fine. As soon as Bobby writes, I'll show. Don't worry.
Okay.
So basically, we were talking about the ASU. We were looking at the ASU website, and you work there. They're breaking ground for a new multi-purpose arena to feature an ice pad for a hockey team. Yes, an ice hockey team in the state for ASU.
In the desert, yeah.
In the desert. It was a pleasant surprise and a good segue into our next piece, which I'm a hockey fan. So I'm finally get to show my passion. So tell us all the story about how you stumbled upon a famous hockey goalie, a former Tampa Bay Lightning pick, Mano.
So this is how this habit all started. This is where, passion definitely towed the line with obsession. I was yard sailing in Virginia, and I was probably in the midst of, doing my master's work. I don't even know why I was yard sailing, but I remember this little boy, probably 10 years old, standing in front of his, table of sports cards. And I don't know if he pointed it out to me or not, but it was this card of Mano. And I just thought that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's a woman playing ice hockey. And so I started doing things that I had never done. And you have to keep in mind, this is probably like 1992. It's before the internet. So I started going to sport card shows and sport card stores. I started asking them for other cards. And so Yeah, I got a few Mano cards, and then a few more,
Nice.
and a few more, and a few more. So I mean, it just keeps going. And if this was, I think, my last of them, but yeah, she has a lot of cards, and she was this NHL prospect as a goalie. She was a very good ice hockey player, and I just remember the card vendors saying, "Yeah, we think this is kind of a promotion, if you will, to say that we're going to put this woman in an NHL team and a pro team in a men's league, and just kind of like to sell cards or whatever it was, put butts in the seats." And I don't think it ever happened, but at some point I changed my focus and I went to the pre-1972 cards. But it really didn't matter to me what happened in her career, because it was really about the representation of a woman on a sports card, which, sports cards are, even today, which is a misnomer, but they're still so allied with or aligned with men's sports. Like, there's a lot of people that I show the collection to that have dedicated their lives to, women's sports, whether it's coaching or advocacy or teaching or whatever realm it is, that they always say the same thing, like, wow, I never knew this existed. So she's the one that, dropped me down this rabbit hole, if you will. And it's a good rabbit hole, but that's how it all started, with a Mano Rion card.
So we not only did we talk about Olympics where Canadian women won gold, we talked about Germany and Canada producing a lot of vintage cards, and now a Canadian hockey player. I think you have some roots to Canada, Cindy.
I bicycled across Canada after college, so I love Canada. Yeah.
There you go. So we have a lot of good ties there. And by the way, Bobby did clarify what he was referring to. So the wrapper is from the card that you found in an antique.
Oh, yeah. Well, that would have been the O-Pee-Chee card then, though.
Yeah. So this wrapper, and I'll just show real quick.
Yeah.
Is a part of a set. So
yeah, you're right. Yep, London. London, Canada. Yeah. Oh, very nice.
So there you go. So thanks, Bobby, and really appreciate you coming. I know I reached out to you, and I'm glad you made time from your busy schedule to come on our show tonight. So I'm really glad that we got to talk about hockey. So it's a good segue. And Mano Rion, I actually have a few cards I've heard. I'm actually surprised there's that many. I have about 4, and I thought I had a lot. You've got probably the whole run there, but I collect the autograph cards. So the classic one that you showed, I think the green border, I have the autograph version of that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, they had a lot of variations that were looking similar, but they changed like the foil on the outside color just to get collectors buying.
Which is it's interesting because just so everyone who's watching the show who wants to know some other tie into history, it's a classic brand. I believe was made by Golden, the Golden Auctions owner and operator. He created a classic brand. So another cool another cool interesting point, and I have to confirm if this is actually the case, but I think it is. Haley Wickenizer, he's a very famous Canadian ice hockey player up here who's recently become a doctor. Like, she's a mother, a gold medalist,
underachiever.
Amazing person. And she actually played in, I want to say, the Swiss League, and I want to say she's one of the first early, or maybe the pioneer of women playing in the Swiss League. But I have to look that up. So that's another cool thing. Just before I go to another question, we have a friend who's joined. This is our good friend Peter Pacman.
Hey, good to see you. So glad you could join.
He's calling you Auntie. There you go. There's you. So, Peter, thank you very much for joining, and I really appreciate you introducing us to Cindy. So let's go back to the questions because we completely went off topic. We did talk about earlier about adding cards to your collection. I believe we talked about earlier. Oh, what would you consider to be Grail cards that you need to be the ultimate add to your collection?
So this is one of my favorite cards, and this one, it's favorite because this is an athlete that I admired a lot when I was younger, and it was just probably the most prolific athlete in the early part of the 20th century. And it's also one of, even though I found that O-Pee-Chee card, it's probably one of the first cards that, a sport card seller, somebody who owned a sport card store, told me about. And so it took me a while to actually secure it. And that's what also made it special. So it's the Babe Diedrichson, and they spelled her name wrong. They spelled it with a CK. Sorry for my dog. but the Gaudi Sports King series from 1932, I believe. And I have never had this graded. I'd like to have it graded. It's probably not, the sharpest quality, but it was the sharpest quality I could get at the time. And this is one of the cards that I just kept getting outbidded on at the very minute. And then I learned how to bid. But I also have a little bit deeper pockets than I did in grad school.
Awesome.
So yeah, that's one of my favorites. That's I think as an American set, it only has that card and the card of Helen Stevens, the swimmer from the 1932 Olympics.
Your dog agrees too.
He likes Babe. He's like,
yeah.
Go Babe.
So Linda mentioned something here. There are several women from USA team who are part of NHL coaching staff now. Yes, there's several. Another good example is Barb Underwood. If I'm saying her name wrong, I'm thinking, or Underhill. I can't remember right now. She was a prominent figure skater. She is the ice skating coach for the Toronto Maple Leafs. There's also other examples for the Raptors. There's women who are part of the coaching staff, the training staff, and the Blue Jays as well. So there's a lot of equality happening. There just needs to be more of it. So we're working towards it. And then we have another question here. David G. Is Mano Realm considered vintage? No, but she is the reason that Cindy is collecting cards to begin with, which is
exactly.
It's an iconic moment. So it just took a photo. Cindy likes photos. It was a photo. It was a female in an athletic pose in a goalie outfit and goalie equipment, and then got her hooked. So that's the significance of that. So
it kind of cracks me up when I search terms or words on eBay. I'll put in old or vintage because sometimes people just don't know the year. And when sometimes they put things like vintage, like the 1996 soccer team, like that's not vintage. Come on. We need a definition here what vintage is.
It's actually, this topic has come up and a slight deviation from our question, but it's still interesting. What I consider vintage isn't what some younger kids today consider vintage. They consider like the 90s stuff vintage, and I'm like, that's not vintage. That's junk era. And as the older I get, there's different slices of vintage. So I don't want to offend Bobby with my vintage labeling, so I'll leave that alone. So one thing that's interesting about the people that we meet and the people that we interview is, mostly it's about collectibles, and in this case, it's about trading cards and trading cards of female vintage trading cards. People have often other hobbies. For example, Peter Pac-Man likes to do hip hop songs about the hobby. You like to do woodworking and painting. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and what you do and what do you like to paint and what some of your woodworking pieces you're proud of?
I came from a family of artists. My mom is a professional artist. She's a painter. And so I've always been around art and I love to use my hands. And so I've found woodworking and particularly sculpture is just really rewarding. I do it as a hobby, although I have sold some pieces that were, collaborations with my younger sister and through my mom's gallery. And then I'm working on actually 10 pieces with my mom as the artist. And she has selected some wood, and then I'm working with the wood. So we'll see. Those should be up on her gallery page soon. So it's just a really nice outlet. It allows my brain to work in a different way, and you see immediate results. So if you've ever worked in something where you just don't know if you're making a difference, you can actually see the difference pretty quick especially with wood. And the painting is pretty recent. That started with my partner in the pandemic. And even though I grew up with my mom as a painter, I never really painted. And I thought this was really fascinating. So we took some lessons online, and with enough wine, it's a lot of fun. But no, it was truly a lot of fun. And it just kind of, allowed me to explore this two-dimensional medium that I never really did before. And so I still don't feel like, a painter by any means. And to put a blank piece of canvas in front of me is rather daunting, but with wood, and especially what I love is like carving solid blocks of wood into something. It's like I can see it in my head before I carve it. And so, it's really fun. And so I've given away quite a few pieces and I've sold some.
So what's your favorite type of wood to work with?
Hardwoods.
Hardwoods?
Yeah, which is a bitch to work with. It takes, I always say, if you ever want to teach a child patience, teach them how to sand.
Wow.
But it maintains its wood integrity when it comes to, carving solid objects. So.
Awesome.
And they're beautiful. They're just beautiful when you get it down to like a 600 grit.
Wow.
You'll have to share with us after, maybe through text or whatnot. So we'd love to see it. I
Okay.
understand the thrill of art. I got my art juices back during the pandemic, so I'm trying to work on that. I'm also looking at, potentially through some positive influence by our friend Kent here. I might put some pieces up to see what it looks like. So that's coming soon. So
Nice.
let me see where we are with our questions. We're almost at the end, so I just want to make sure we caught all the different pieces. Yeah, okay. So as you continue to share with us your very expansive and somewhat expensive, rare collection of history of women in trading cards, what if someone were to approach you and to ask you, what do you want the public to take away on this journey that you shared with us? What are the key takeaways you want them to realize from your collection?
I think that, if you could see the whole collection, which is kind of overwhelming, even to me, it shows you the depth of how many women participated in sport to way back. Given the opportunity, they will participate. And that's not the story we're often told. And they've even done studies of asking, girls, like, identify an athlete, they'll identify a man, or they don't think sports even happened before Title IX. And so this is a really fascinating visual representation of the depth of women that participated in sport. And it also broadens it from just the American angle to, an international level. And in such a fun way, to learn about it as trading cards. It's not like reading a history book. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that there is a deep, deep history of women that participated in sport. And this is a great way to show it.
That is that's a very good way to explain it. So I'm glad you did that. And the purpose of our show is to motivate and inspire. So hopefully, not hopefully, somebody will be inspired watching this, and they'll say, you know what, I watched Cindy Dick one time on Thinking Outside the Box, Cardboard Culture, and I'm inspired to do something. We may have found something of a commonality. Bobby graduated as a master woodworker. So maybe,
See, I'm telling you.
maybe.
Wow.
Maybe there is some relationship, like a brother from another mother, or
the same brain. Yeah.
people who collect vintage do woodworking. Maybe we'll just overgeneralize right now. So
it's worth a study.
That's for sure. Maybe I should have you both on one time in the near future, and we can talk about other angles of psychology and the art of collecting vintage and documenting it, because you're documenting it, he's documenting it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of commonalities there.
It's just the synergies, they just match the lineup.
This is awesome. So we're at the end of our show, and I apologize to you. Went a little bit past the hour mark, and I really appreciate you staying back for this. Just before we get to our last, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I said, of course, it's my pleasure.
So just before we get to our last question, which is our best question, and Kent's going to take it away tonight, but I want to thank Cindy for coming to our show. Her Instagram handle is @GiantLegends, Tiny Treasures, Giant Legends. It's basically a visual expose of all the vintage trading cards featuring women, especially from 1972 and earlier. There's interesting history to it. Please take the time to go look at her channel, subscribe to her Instagram handle, and follow her Instagram handle. You won't be disappointed. And then she also has a connection with several other very prominent collectors. Another one is Women on Tops. I've been following her as well. She's got some pretty smart stuff as well. And there's plenty of other women that we've interviewed on our show, which has been amazing. And I'm really glad that I've learned from all of you, because you're teaching us slices of humanity along this journey. So on August 17th, next week, we'll have AJ from @Black Key Comics. Again, Peter Pac-Man is the reason I met this guy as well. So a double success there. So Kent, take it away, buddy.
Actually, before I ask the last question, I'm just going to show what Bobby just mentioned.
Do you have a copy of
I have two reference books that I use in a lot of online resources. I don't remember seeing the Non-Sports Bible by Chris Watson. There's a American Tobacco Company book, and also the Murray's collectible catalog or something from Scotland. But I'll look up that, because I've trolled many lists online and try to put together this database. Yeah.
So we can connect on our channel and ask each other questions, or we'll connect you somehow. Don't worry about that. Linda, it was a pleasure having you on the channel. Really glad you enjoyed it. We enjoyed it too. And now we're going to do the part that we love the most. Go ahead, buddy.
So, Cindy, we asked this question of all of our guests as the last question. And the question is, what inspires you?
So what I found is that writing this book has been an arduous process. It's like I said, I like working with my hands. I like being active. So to sit down and just read, not my stick. Reading and research and writing. And I love the history I unearthed, but it's been an arduous process. And so what inspires me is when someone like Peter or someone like Linda or my sister or my friend Rena, people, I mean, I could list people for hours, but people that never have seen the cards before, and they get what they're about with a little explanation, and they're so into it. Like they really appreciate the history that's captured in these little cards, and they get that same excitement that I had when I first found my first vintage card. That inspires me, and it keeps me going in this process, because I know that there's an audience for the book, that it's interesting. It's not, I mean, it is history, but it's an interesting way of showing history. And so I love and am inspired by other people's enthusiasm and this like genuine enthusiasm for the project. So this has been a pleasure, guys. Thank you for the very thoughtful questions and the questions.
Oh, you're welcome.
And Bobby, yes, we'll have to meet, but I really appreciate the time and the platform to share about the Giant Legends project.
And it's not going to end. So this is not the end of the journey. This is just a small step on many more paths of your journey, and we get to be a part of it. So that's cool too. We'll definitely have you back. I definitely want to see where your book goes and take it from there. But you hang out with us for a second. We're going to end the show.
Before I close it out, I just want to share a couple of comments here from our regular guest, Dennis. Great show tonight. Love the topic. I think we all learned something.
Thank you.
And the next one is from Name. Awesome show. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. I look forward to looking at your collection.
Yes.
And I have to personally thank Peter too. He's been a huge part of the Giant Legends project, and thank you for connecting all of us. And thank you for everyone else who tuned in. I can't see everybody, but I'm sure I'll hear about it afterwards. And it's been a lot of fun.
We'll make sure we put your Instagram handle and all that stuff in the description, so people will find you, and your channel will continue to grow.
Thank you.
So we're going to say good night to everyone. Thank you.
One more from Bobby. Great show for sure. Enjoyed it very much, Cindy. It was great. From Bobby.
Thank you.
There you go. So I'm glad we hooked up some two vintage nerds. We're going to call you nerds together. And I'm sure there'll be more conversations coming from there.
Very cool. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye.